Good morning, members, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can I just mention that we are being live streamed, so you'll need to be on your best behaviour. And if there is a fire, then run, and the doors are there and there. So if we could start with apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. With apologies for this morning's joint meeting from Councillors Brown and Executive Member Councillor May. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is urgent business. There's no urgent business. Next is division of agenda. It may be necessary to, there may be exempt information, and that in the last item on the agenda. We'll decide that when we come to it. Declaration of interest.
Yes, Chairman. As there is discussion around the funding of the CVS, I need to declare an interest because I'm a trustee of South Hams CVS. And when there's a question here, so I will stay to hear the answer to the question, but if there is further debate throughout the meeting, then I shall leave.
Thank you. Public forum. We have one question, and the question is from Penny Algardi. Would you like to stand up, and would you like to introduce yourself and then ask the question, please?
Yes, I'm Penny Algardi, a trustee of South Hams Community and Voluntary Services. And yes, this is my question, or our question, on behalf of the trustees.
Chairman, that's just been transferred.
Yes.
Would you like to use that microphone
Yes,
there?
sorry, I forgot about the recording. Sorry. Shall I say again?
Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Penny Elgadi, the trustee of South Hams Community and Voluntary Services. So this is our question. Every district in Devon funds their community and voluntary services, CVS, helping to support their priorities in building resilient, safe and connected communities with the well-being of residents at their heart. The support of the District Council to South Hams CVS over many years has been invaluable, also in reinforcing the trust in the sector and the CVS with other funders and partners. The total withdrawal of the grant to South Hams CVS proposed in the budget would therefore put the CVS at significant risk of closure and the safe future of the voluntary sector in South Hams at risk. What thoughts have the Council given to how support will be provided to the voluntary and community sector in the South Hams without the core services of South Hams CVS? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for your question. This matter is going to be discussed at this meeting today, and there will be a recommendation to the meeting that the funding be restored. So, but that is subject to debate and the decision of this meeting. The decision arising out of this meeting will be a recommendation to the executive committee that meet on the 6th of February. They will discuss the matter, they will consider the recommendation from this meeting, and they in turn will make a recommendation to full council on the 13th of February. Could I just say that there will be an opportunity, if you wish, to ask a question at the executive on the 6th of February. So I hope that answers your question. You have the right to a supplementary question, if you wish, arising from my response.
Thank you very much for the response, and indeed that's encouraging to hear. And we do know that in the last few days, many of our member organisations have written to councillors requesting that the grant to CVS be continued. And indeed, the support of the District Council to CVS over the past 25 years, since it was founded in 1995, has been really invaluable. And so for the future sustainability and well-being of our communities, the partnership between the District County Council CVS and local community organisations is of paramount importance. Certainly, we're ready to provide any additional information on the work of CVS if that's needed and would be helpful. And our one supplementary question might be, is this: what can we do to ensure a closer, trusted working relationship and partnership between the District Council and CVS into the future?
Well, I think,
Thank you.
in answer to your supplementary question, I think you will find that in the debate, arising out of the debate, will be proposals for the way that the council can work together with you. So I suggest you might like to await the outcome of the debate and also hear the debate. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda is the revenue budget proposals. What I intend to do is to go through the paper that is before you, page by page, and that will give an opportunity for members to ask questions, and it's questions only. And then once we have been through the papers and you've asked questions, we'll then move to the debate. So if we could start on page, 1 second. Page 3 is just the recommendations. So if we could move on to page 4. Are there any questions on page 4? No. Any questions on page 5? No. Any questions on page 6? Any questions on page 7? Page 8? Page 9? Page 10? Page 11? Page 12? Page 13? Page 14? Page 15? Page 16? Page 17? Page 18? Page 19? Page 20? Page 21? Page 22?
Question on 21, sorry, Chair.
21,
Yeah.
okay.
This may not be the right stage to actually...
Which item were you referring to?
It's page 20, page 21, 238. It's just to do with...
238?
Yes, 238 on the recommendations for funding for various services.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
As I say, this may not be the right point, but I just wanted to point out that funding was available for various towns for ring and ride services, but Kingsbridge is not included. But this may be it may be that this should be mentioned later on in the debate. And I have spoken to various town council and various people in Kingsbridge, and there are various community transport projects they would like funding for as well. But I'm very happy to mention it later on in the debate if that's appropriate.
Yeah, so the question is?
The question is, can funding be allocated to Kingsbridge as well as, which is one of the 4 main towns in the district, as Ivybridge, Dartmouth, Totnes, and all 3 are mentioned in terms of ring and ride services. Kingsbridge is not mentioned. It doesn't have a ring and ride service, but it has... sorry, have I got my thing on there?
No.
But it does have a proposal to introduce a community transport service or to extend the town service, and it is in fact the worst served town in the whole of Devon for public transport.
Okay.
So wanted to let you know.
Would you like to turn that off?
Thank you.
No, well, can I just have the question answered? Well, Councillor Baldry, did you want to respond as an executive member?
Yeah, Chairman, I'm responding in the absence of Councillor May, who, as you know, is sick, and we all wish well. Councillor O'Callaghan has answered her own questions because, in fact, Kingsbridge do not have a ring and ride service. If an application is made to this council for funding in the budget for the following year, I'm sure it will be favourably received. But for this year, there is no ring and ride service in Kingsbridge, and therefore no funding will be allocated. And I will also take issue with Councillor O'Callaghan's comment that Kingsbridge is the worst served public transport town in the county. Is anything but.
Okay. Am I also right in saying that, in fact, there was no application made for the funding? Because all the applications that are listed were the subject of applications made which were considered. So there was no application made by Kingsbridge.
Chairman, I have a bit of knowledge of these ring and ride services. It's immaterial, but my mother was involved with running the Totnes and Dartmouth ring and ride, which closed a couple of years ago. What I would suggest is that you, with regard to Kingsbridge, you've got 3 providers there which are listed. We make have discussions with those providers to see whether they would extend, that sort of service into Kingsbridge.
Yes, I mean, I've had discussions with Kingsbridge, and they are trying to look into extending the current services available, and any extra funding would be appreciated, but it's just noticeable that, sorry.
You need to use the microphone.
Yes, sorry, I thought it was on. Yes, it's just noticeable that it's not included. So I just thought I'd flag it up.
Okay. Thank you. Right, next is page 22. Sorry, Councillor Hodgson. Which page are we to?
Still on page 21.
21,
Right.
okay.
2 questions. One is regarding point 1E, Totnes and Dartmouth Ring and Ride. That's the Newton Abbot Community Transport Group. What's the contribution that they make to that? Do we know?
Is there an executive member or officer can answer that question? Do you want?
In other words, Teambridge District
Can
Council.
I, yeah, we'll come back to that.
Okay, that's fine.
Can I just make the point that, in fact, all members were requested by email to submit questions before 5 o'clock on Monday, so that any questions could receive full and comprehensive answers. So that.
Okay, fine.
But that will come back on. We'll come back on that one.
And just the other point I just wanted to ask about was the community CVS, point C. Is there going to be an opportunity during this meeting
Yes.
this morning to debate that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. Page 22. Page 23. 24. 25. 26. 27. 28. 29. And then we go on to Appendix A. There's 2 pages of Appendix A. That's 31 and 32. And then, sorry, Councillor Brazil.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just on the employment and state income, so we're expecting an extra 25,000.
Microphone.
Yeah,
Which item, which page is it on, Councillor Brazil?
32.
32.
About a third up from the bottom. Employment and estates income 25,000. Can I just check? I think it was in the notes above, but unfortunately my computer decided to close down at that point. The employment status, can I just check that 25,000 is the correct figure, and also that is from the Ermington business units?
Yes, that's correct. And also, each year, the rental units, there is a market rate uplift, so inflation is added on to all of our, all of them have a rental review, so there's a gradual increase in the rental income over the whole portfolio as well. So it includes rental inflation, but also the Ermington units.
Thank you. Can I just have a do we have any idea what the breakdown is there for Ermington and the increase and the percentage uplift, inflationary uplift in rentals?
I can certainly get the figures for Ermington. If we could just have a minute or two to have a look at that. Yes. Unless Chris knows the answer to that. No. Okay, thanks.
Okay. So we then go to Appendix B. Sorry, Councillor Sweet. Which page?
The page we're on, I believe, in Appendix
32 or 33?
31.
31.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask the housing benefit overpayment recoveries. There's nothing for this year, but that's 100,000 next year, going on to 70,000. Is there a reason for that change? It's about halfway down, I think, on page 31. Housing benefit overpayment recoveries. There's nothing for the past year, but then it goes up to 100,000, then to 70,000.
Yes. So
Would you like to turn your...
what we're seeing is now that we've got the rollout of universal credit across the district, and we're not getting the same level of housing benefit overpayments that we were in past years. When we recover those overpayments, we do also get subsidy back on those overpayments. Because we're generating less overpayments, the income we're getting back from that subsidy is reducing over a period. And what you see there is that we're saying that in 2021 we'll have a cost pressure of 100,000, and then in the second year, in 21-22, we think it will go down a further 70,000. So when you look at our housing benefit overpayments, they are decreasing because of things like rollout through the DWP of real-time information and universal credit. That's generating less overpayments because everything's more real-time. There's not a delay in between claims being processed and changes in an applicant's circumstances, which generates that overpayment in the first place. So because we got income from that, we now need to reduce that income target because those overpayments aren't being generated to the same level that they were in prior years.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to sort of ensure that that wasn't directly coming from people that had been being overpaid for a period of time, and due to the introduction of universal credit, that individuals weren't out of pocket, so to speak. Thanks.
It's not through individuals being out of pocket. It's more that the overpayments aren't generated in the first place because we've got real-time information now with the DWP. So it's a much more efficient process now through the real-time information, but you're not getting that delay that we had in previous years. But it's not impacting on the applicant.
Okay. Could you put your mic on, please? Microphone. We can't hear you.
On page 31, waste collection and recycling, can you say a little more about the 174% increase? 174 difference percent.
You need to turn your machine. You need to turn it off.
Yes, the reduction in recycling income is due to, it's a national market position that we're seeing in terms of the reduction in the price that we're able to get for our recyclables. It is due to the markets being not taking recycling material which is contaminated, so the cleaner that your recycling material is, the better price you get for it. There's a lot of competition within the market now. So because until we move to the Devon line service, we are seeing that we're not able to get that, and it is a national thing, we're not able to get that recycling income to the same level that we were before. So it's the international market, so it's things like coming out of China. It's national across the waste industry. It's not specific to South Hams. But what we do know is that by the time we move to the Devon line service, that recycling income risk is shared with the contractor. So that risk reduces, but not until September 2020. But it is a national thing amongst the waste industry. We had a meeting of the Waste Partnership Board and discussed that in a lot of detail around the markets for recycling. But it is down to the cleaner your recycling is and the less contamination there is. So the only things we can keep doing to enhance that are things like when we did communications around not putting pizza boxes in with your recycling, things like that, and just encouraging residents to have the cleanest recycling that we can. Does that answer the question? I don't know if the executive member also wants to add anything to that.
Can I just say it is dealt with in some detail in the report that's before members.
I have another question, please.
Which page?
Page 31.
Yeah.
With regards to the housing benefit overpayment, there's quite a big change there, isn't there? And quite a big difference, £30,000. Can you give some explanation?
With respect, Councillor Pennington, that question's just been answered. That was put by Councillor
Oh yes,
Scrutiny, and it was answered.
So it has, yes.
Yeah, it was answered.
I've forgotten
Yes.
she just read it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Page. Sorry, Councillor Baldry.
Yeah, I can't add a lot to what the Head of Finance said about it, but I'm sure Councillor Pennington would understand that as an economist, it's all about supply and demand. And the demand is for very, very good quality waste materials, and a lot of the stuff which was being sent to China is being rejected, and the market is now flooded.
Okay, thank you. Page 32. Page 33. Appendix C on page 35. Councillor Brazil. Would you like to put your mic on, please?
I think it's this one. Yes. So 35, the Marine Infrastructure Fund. It's got there that there's going to be a £68,000 spend on Batson, but my understanding is that that's been delayed. Could I just have an update on that, please?
Mr. Brooke, would you like to find a mic?
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
That's correct. So that project is being reviewed because the costs of delivery were way in excess of the budget position. So the team are reviewing that over the summer period with a view to bringing back either a better budget position and delivery over next winter, or a different approach if the expected costs and the budgets don't align.
Thank you.
Chairman, so can I assume on that the 68,000 will go back into the marine infrastructure budget reserve?
Mr. Brooke, I think the answer is yes.
It looks to me, yes.
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 I think what the appendix is showing is that there was a commitment against that. So it's highlighting the fact that there was a commitment in the capital programme. But yes, it won't be spent in 1920. No.
What I didn't want to do is suddenly that 68,000 in reserves, that for a project, to end up being spent in some feasibility, revenue-y sort of way, that the reserve suddenly disappears a bit.
I think you've made your point, Councillor Brazil.
And in terms of procedure, any spend of reserves over 30,000 has to come to council for approval, as per the constitution.
Thank you. Okay. 30, then Appendix D, which is on page 37.
37.
Councillor Pennington.
I have a couple of questions on page 37, please.
Okay.
The very large change, 34% in ferry major repairs. Can you say something on that? And secondly, on page 37, just the repairs and maintenance up 31%. What are some of the reasons?
So the first item was the ferry major repairs and renewals. Is that the first question? In other words, you want an explanation as to why it's gone up from, why it is going to go up from one. It's anticipated to go up from 117 to 147. Yeah. 34%.
So a condition survey was carried out and looking at the whole life costing of things like the tugs and everything that we need for the ferry operation. The assets team looked at the amount of money that would need to be put aside every year into that reserve so that when those tugs and ferries need replacement, there's sufficient funding in that reserve to do that. That exercise has been undertaken during this financial year, and on the basis of that condition survey, we are recommending that those contributions to the reserves are increased so that when the time comes that major repairs or renewals are needed for the ferry, that there's sufficient funding within the reserve to be able to do that. So that was on the back of a very technical exercise that was taken out on the ferry service. I don't know if Mr. Brooke wants to add any information on that, but that was on the back of that exercise. With regards to repairs and maintenance, very similar thing. The contribution into the repairs and maintenance reserve has been 55,000 for at least the last 5 or 6 years. An exercise has been undertaken with regards to what repairs and maintenance contribution do we need to ensure the asset condition of all of our assets meets good criteria and a good standard, and on the back of that we are recommending that the contribution is increased. We've not increased that contribution to that reserve for several years, and we feel we need to start increasing that so that we've got sufficient funding to keep our assets in good repair.
Thank you. Mr. Brooke, do you want to add to that, or is that no? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we've gone through the papers, and are there any outstanding questions to be answered or can be answered, or are they to be answered at a later date?
With regards to the question around Ermington, the Ermington units, the majority of that was for Ermington, that 25.
Okay.
So what, 13,000 as opposed to 12,000? If that's the majority, it's just that. Sorry. Yeah, of the 25,000. But I'd quite like to have accurate figures. I've been sent a business plan that has got Ermington business units earning £27,000 per annum, with a payback of 16 years on the capital expenditure. What it's in here is 25,000. We're now saying it's less than 25,000. I'd just like to get an accurate figure as to what is the return on that.
Mr. Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. The business case is still what we stand behind. There's a slight difference between what's in the budget and what the expected income is, and that's just a conservative approach to budgeting, reflecting the unknowns in the market. So what's really important is that in a year's time, we look back at what we've actually brought in and check that it's aligned, and I'm sure you want to see that, and we'll be happy to share it as we do with our whole estate. So the business case, you've got isn't any worth any less or is any or in any way undermined by the budget position. They're just two slightly different processes.
Hold on one second. Who's somebody want to assist? Oh, Councillor Pearce.
It's not on this one, but somebody asked a question about the Teambridge Ring and Ride. It's my understanding
No, I
that
think it was the Newton Abbott.
the same one.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Newton Abbott Ring and Ride. If I recall correctly, yes, Teambridge do make a contribution to them, but the contribution we make is for the work they do in our district. And in particular, the reason they do that is because they specialise in taking wheelchair users to the shops. And our shops are not really suitable for wheelchair users because all our shops are on hills. But in Teambridge, they've got a shopping centre which is on the flat, which is ideal for wheelchair users. And that's why they've got involved in our district.
Thank you. Okay, can we now move on to the recommendations that are set out on page 3 and 4. Now there is a proposed amendment to the recommendation, and members will have received from Mr. White an email dated the 21st of January sent at 8:30 in the evening, which is very admirable. Thank you very much indeed for that. That email sets out the proposals which are effectively an alternative budget, and I'm proposing that we deal with this first and deal with it on an item-by-item basis. Mr. White, could you just run through the various recommendations that will be on the screen? So we start with number 1, then there's number 2 and 3. This is dealing with expenditure, and then this deals with income. There's 1 and 2 there, and then 3, and then it deals with the matter of the bottom there, partnership funding, and there's 1 more, and then finally dealing with the matter of unallocated new homes bonus. So I'd like to propose this alternative recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Abbott, Councillor Sweet and Councillor Long. Alphabetical order, I think. So if we could start with item 1, which is the recommendation that a fund of £400,000 be set up for emergency climate change projects in order to give effect to the action plan being produced by the Council. And it is proposed that part of the fund be open to bids from community groups with proposals for climate change projects. The mechanism for providing such funds to be established, as well as the extent of the expenditure by this Council and that awarded to community groups. The reason that this is being brought forward is that all members will quite clearly recall that on the 25th of July, this Council declared an emergency climate and biodiversity, and from that, an action plan is being drawn up. And also within the budget proposals, there is the appointment of a climate change officer that we are sharing with West Devon, and there is an item of £25,000 in the budget for that. So it is felt that in order to ensure that we can take forward the action, that a substantial sum of money be allocated to enable this Council to give effect to the action plan being produced. So that is we will deal with that proposal first. So would anybody like to speak to or for or against? No? Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Chairman. Do I need to stand up?
No.
I think this is actually really important. I think otherwise we're spending one way or another a lot of officer time in that direction. plus we're looking at having a climate change officer who could evaluate a lot of the projects, but we will be particularly unable to do anything about any of these projects if we haven't got any money to actually spend and invest. I think this is a very sound investment, and I think it looks like a substantial amount of money, but I think it also reflects the seriousness of the problem that we're facing at the moment. Just to compare what this money looks like, I remember a couple of years ago, I think we allocated 120,000 just for some consultation on setting up a private company that could actually do trading for us. So on that basis, and that was actually they didn't charge us the full amount, but nevertheless, a lot of money was spent on something that didn't really come to anything very much. And I think this is money that if we've got an officer to work and administer this, I think it could be very effective. And I think it's the kind of action that local authorities should be taking. And I think it would put us very much favourably in the public eye for taking such a forward-thinking action.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
I agree with everything that Councillor Hodgson just said, and all I'd add to that is that just to put that, of course, as we've declared a climate emergency, this is in a way kind of putting our money where our mouth is, which I think is quite an important thing if we have publicly declared an emergency. Also, I know that a lot of councils are under quite heavy scrutiny from the public and also from the legal sector, evaluating how each council that has declared an emergency is backing up that decision. So I think that this is a really important and valuable way of putting our money where our mouth is. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pennington.
Yes, I just want to be clear in my own mind with regard, this is under item 1, isn't it?
Yes.
Because we are constricted to a £5 increase, or an increase of around about 3%. Now, quite clearly, if we're going to increase this for climate change with an officer as well, what effect will this have on various other services? Surely, does it mean that certain other services which we're hoping to provide will have to be reduced?
No, the answer is it doesn't have any impact at all on any other services within the council. Thank you. Next speaker. Councillor Brazil.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Obviously, I welcome this, but I would just say that I hope that this is by no means the limit of the amounts of money that we're going to spend on the climate change emergency. There are plenty of capital projects and revenue-raising projects that we can invest in to both produce revenue and indeed reduce our carbon emissions and increase biodiversity. And we've got plenty of money in reserves across the board, and so whereas I absolutely welcome this initial fund, particularly the community involvement, I also would like to say that I definitely wouldn't see this as a top limit and just merely a starter. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I also support the money, 400,000, being used as a climate emergency reserve. I was just wondering about how the decisions will be made about how the money will be spent and whether that will go back to the climate change working group.
Yes, that is quite clear. The mechanism will need to be established, but I think it is envisaged that it will go to the climate change working group, who will come up with proposals that then will go forward for approval. So that I think it's envisaged that's where it will the procedure and the mechanism for dealing with this will start at that working group. Any other speakers? Shall we move to the vote on this? Yes? Right. All those in favour?
That's 22 in favour. Thank you, Chair.
Any against?
None against.
Okay, thank you. Right, if we move on to item 2. car parking charges for all car parks to be frozen. The cost is 80,000. The reason the cost is 80,000 is in the budget there is a sum for income under the budget that is within the original recommendation, is that there was a proposal that the car parking charges be increased by 4% to give an income of 80,000. The alternative budget proposes that car parking charges be frozen, and therefore that 80,000 that is in the original needs to be taken out. This is being put forward. One of the main reasons is that in respect of the car parks in our town centres, the town centres within the district are experiencing problems. In Totnes alone, there are over 10 businesses that are up for sale. There are empty shops, and I'm sure the same in other towns. We need to ensure that business is brought to that customers do come to the town, and one of the ways of doing that is to freeze car parking charges, and that was one of the reasons. I think Councillor Brazil, you also have thoughts on that. So, would you like to supplement what I've just said?
Well, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, no, I've long championed the idea that car parking charges discourage residents and visitors from shopping in our town centres. You need look no further than the out-of-town shopping centres that always have free car parking. You can rest assured that they've researched this vigorously and they understand the behaviour of consumers when it comes to car parking charges. So I very much welcome this freeze. I mean, personally, I'd like to go further, but I appreciate that that's not what's on the agenda. I've also been very clear that when we're looking to pay for this, because I appreciate that it is £80,000 that we're looking for. Obviously, Southam's largest car park that they own, parking's for free. Just happens to be at Fullerton House. I'd like to introduce car parking charges at Fullerton House, just as people who have to go to hospitals, etc., have to pay. I don't see any reason why we should have free parking at Fullerton House.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Yes, boss.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I can't agree with this. It's part of our core budget, but you keep on saying that people are staying away from shops. The reason people are staying away from shops is the internet, and that's fairly well accepted. And as for Totnes, where I have shopped with my wife more often than not, very often I have great difficulty in parking. So I don't think the car parking charges, actually the amount, is the problem. There's a larger, far bigger issue outside of that, and I won't be supporting this amendment.
Okay. Councillor Sweet.
I thank you. As a shopkeeper and a member of the Totnes Chamber of Commerce, I support Julian's proposal. If that is indeed one, I would second that if he was making a proposal. We are desperately short of parking, as has been pointed out. There's lots of people driving around and around in circles looking for places to park on busy weekends and summer and over Christmas. We've got an amazing car park here at Fullerton House, which isn't promoted at all. I don't think tourists know it's here, especially on Fridays and Saturdays, where there actually isn't, the amount of workers in. So I think that we've got a resource here that we could actually be claiming revenue from. I will support the freezing of parking charges, although I do agree that actual cost isn't really the issue. I just wanted to also point out that, as Councillor Butcher said, there are a few empty shops in Totnes at the moment, but as far as I'm aware, they're all changing over, they're all rented, and business is good in Totnes.
Can I just clarify that the only proposal that is before us is the freezing of car parking charges? I think what Councillor Brazil was stating was an aspiration rather than a proposal.
I agree with his aspiration, and I think it could be taken a lot further.
Yeah,
Yeah, Councillor Thomas.
Hang on, no. Well,
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Foss is absolutely right. Obviously, the increase in Amazon shopping is driving people away from the shops. But I think as a council, we should probably be arguing that it's our duty to do as much as we possibly can to make people want to use the shops, to make them want to stop using websites, to make them want to come and use their communities. And I think freezing parking charges is going some way towards helping with that. And as such, I would support it wholeheartedly.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, bearing in mind what we voted on just a few minutes ago, which was this 400,000 for investment in climate emergency measures, for a long time, actually the Green Group, I don't think it's been widely supported, has been looking for PV to be invested in at our car parks. And in fact, we could look at our car parks as an opportunity for investment. And rather than sting the individual coming into these town centres, which we are stopped all the time. In fact, I was stopped on my way in this morning by a member of the public who was moaning about what can South Hams do to make it better, to improve things for the businesses. I accept the argument about what's happening with the internet, but I do think we've perhaps got to get a bit of a broader view. And I think if we're seen to be investing via things like putting PV on the car parks, we could find that actually we get a lot more support from people if it's hand in hand with keeping those charges frozen. So I will actually be supporting this recommendation, but on the basis that we will be seeking different types of way in investing to actually raise that money, still through the car parks, but not necessarily from the individual parking people's purses.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I think I will not be supporting this motion. I'm in favour of raising car parking charges because car parking is at a premium in Totnes. We have lost one car park recently where people can park, not South Hams Council car park. We're likely to lose another one where the old co-op store was. When the planning goes ahead there won't be so much parking. It's very difficult very often to park in Totnes. If you visit Dartmouth, you can drive round and round and not find a place to park. And in Kingsbridge, the last time I was down there, it was difficult to park also. So a lot of people are coming into our areas, they're visiting our towns. Totnes and indeed all our towns, the shops don't necessarily suffer from car parking charges, they suffer from high rents and business rates. That's what's killing the shops. Many private shopkeepers cannot afford to pay the high rents and the business rates, and that's why they've been moving out. But if you look at Totnes, the banks have nearly all gone, and those bank facilities where they were, those shops, they've now been turned into shops, and they are very acceptable. And I just feel that the car parks have to be maintained. We need to periodically be tarmacked. We've had quite a few of our car parks have had new white lining because all the vehicles have got bigger so that people can park more easily. And this is just a 4% increase, and that's not a huge amount. If you go in other areas, you can pay an awful lot more to park than we do in South Hams. So I fully support the...
Thank you. Councillor Pennington.
I think we should raise the car parking charges. It's only by 4% anyway, and nobody has produced any evidence that I can find that it is car parking charges that cause people not to come into the towns to shop. I don't think it does. I don't think people consider that particularly as a deterrent, and so therefore I shall not be. I think we should remain as they are, at 80%.
Councillor Chan.
Thank you, Chair. I think looking at the bigger picture of how to tackle the climate emergency, I don't think we should be encouraging car use. I think we should be encouraging public transport, car sharing, things like that. So for that reason, I will not be supporting this recommendation.
Okay. Councillor Panel.
I take issue about charges being reasonable. We often travel away. It struck me, we went to Richmond-on-Thames, which is not exactly the worst heeled area of Britain, where the charges were considerably less for parking than they are here. And when I compare other areas, Southampton, Banbury, we've both been to recently, where charges are much lower than we charge, I do think they have a deterrent effect on people wanting to come in and support the shops. So I'll support this.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I raise a couple of questions, if it's okay? Firstly, in response to Councillor Thomas laying the blame solely on Amazon, could we respectfully point out that other internet service shops are available?
Okay, yes, point taken.
Thank you. On a slightly more serious note, can I ask how the loss of income would be paid for? Could I also mention, in respect of Totnes and their car parking problems, there are other car parks outside Totnes, and we ought to be thinking about them as well. But the proposal for the 4% increase is well below the rate of inflation, and dare I say that in some respects there is almost an expectation that car parking charges, A, will be payable, and B, possibly might rise. And since this rate is below inflation, it's perhaps not an unreasonable rate. And this is the only opportunity we seem to have within our 4-year tenure to consider this matter seriously. And apart from anything, can I agree with Councillor Chown that we shouldn't be encouraging people to come into town centres anyway, and we should be encouraging them to use park and rides where they are available, or seeking alternative forms of transport, and perhaps increasing car parking charges might therefore contribute towards climate change.
Thank you. Can I just pick up a point that you made, that it's the proposed increase is below inflation? That's not correct. I've just been given the sum by Mrs. Buckle, and inflation is less than 2%. Okay, make that point. And can I just answer the other point? You also raised a question concerning as to where the money is coming from. That comes in the next part of the recommendation that's before us, and and is set out in the email that was sent out by Mr. White earlier this week. Councillor Pearce.
Chairman, can I point out that we, the executive, are guaranteeing that this will be the only increase in car parking charges in this administration. Therefore, it is counted over 4 years, not 1 year. So it is well below the level of inflation. I'd like to make that absolutely clear to everybody.
Councillor Austin.
I was just about to make exactly the same point myself. I think it's quite important to understand that we're looking at a 4% one-off increase in car parking over a 4-year period. So, you know, the reference that was made to inflation rates, it would be wrong of us to go back and represent to anybody that we're looking at putting up charges by 4%, and therefore this is well above the rate of inflation. The intention of this is a 4% increase over a 4-year period. So over that period of time, it's definitely going to be below the rate of inflation. I have another concern in terms of the budget. There seems to be an implication, I think I'm right in this, that the cost of this not being implemented would be offset by an expectation that we would get income from planning on a constant basis based on the performance of planning income in the past. But the planning income previously received is not actually a performance indicator of what we're likely to get in the future, and there's quite a considerable possibility that we may get lower income from planning in the future. In fact, the recommendation from the income that we're expected to get is, I believe, fairly accurate. So if we take the expectation of income from planning to be accurate going forward, we wouldn't be able to offset any reduction in income from parking by expecting planning income to continue in the way it has done previously.
Yeah, we're discussing the matter of anticipated income shortly. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Holway.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to make the point that I think it's Morrison's in Totnes, Tesco in Kingsbridge, and the Watermark car park in Ivybridge. There's 2 hours free parking available, which does give people time to go shopping in the towns. As long as they don't make the same mistake as my wife, then they won't have to pay the £50 surcharge. So I think, you know, there are opportunities for parking in our main towns. I accept Dartmouth's got a problem, but Dartmouth's always got a problem because it needs to park and ride. But the other towns are okay. and I won't be able to support this.
Okay. Any other speakers? Sorry, Councillor Baldry.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I, as the portfolio holder for car parking, take the unusual position that I do not agree with the increase? I totally support the freezing of charges. I'm just picking up a couple of points which have been made during the debate. We've had significant discussion about Totnes, but there is much more to Southampton than Totnes. We are not Totnes Town Council. And I will speak, if I may, on behalf of the people I represent at the western end of the district, where Councillor Holway has mentioned Ivy Bridge and the various Tesco stores. But in addition, at the western end, Plymouth City Council provide free parking in Plimpton and in Plymstock. And people can go there and park for between 2 and 4 hours free of charge. And Councillor Brazil has made the very valid point, the reason that the supermarkets, who supply, of course, a lot more than just foodstuffs nowadays, they provide clothing and hardware and so on. People will go there, the supermarkets provide free parking in those places. It would be lovely, would it not, if we had a decent public transport service so people didn't need to use their cars. But for most of the Southams, there is an awful public transport service and people cannot use their cars. I'm picking up the point that we should not be encouraging people to use our town centres. I think that's a pretty disgraceful point which has been made by some members. Of course, the point of principle is we should be encouraging people to use local businesses and go into our car parks, and this is just one symptom. We are already saying to people, you come into our towns and we're going to charge you for using the lavatory, or we're closing the lavatories. That is not encouraging people to use our towns, and I think we as a council have a duty as a point of principle to encourage people to use our towns and local businesses. To say to them we're increasing car parking charges means to them we are not encouraging them to do so, and we should be, I would hope, that members of this Scrutiny and Development Management Committee agree with the proposal to freeze charges. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, I have no more Sorry, Councillor Hodgson.
Sorry, Chairman, just to clarify, I mean, with respect, Councillor Baldry, I don't think anybody said that people shouldn't be encouraged to go into the town centres, unless I've been asleep for this meeting. But I didn't hear that expressed. I think there was concern about how the mechanism works. Okay, maybe it was muttered. Okay.
Okay, right, any more speakers? No one, then we'll move to the vote. So, all those in favour of the recommendation that car parking charges for all car parks be frozen for the next financial year. All those in favour?
That's 12 in favour, thank you, Chair.
All those against?
With 11 against, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Right, if we could then move on to the matter, oh yes, there's just last item, sorry. There is a, currently on the recommended budget that's on the paper, there's a budget gap of 51,543. It's a simple proposal that we ensure it's a balanced budget and close the budget gap of 51,543. Presumably, sorry, Councillor Pearce.
Chairman, on a point of order, how can you vote something through without knowing where the money is coming from?
Because we're dealing with that next.
No, but you still can't vote on it if you don't know where the money is coming from.
Well, we have voted on it, yes. Thank you. Closing the budget gap of 51,543, presumably we are all in agreement on that. Yes? Yes? Do I need to put that to the vote, or is anybody doesn't agree with that? No, I think we all agree with that. Okay, we next move on to a matter of where is the money coming from, and so if we could move the slide on. So first of all, we deal with the matter of. Yeah. We could deal with the matter of the income from planning fees is understated. Just by way of background, as it says here, that the monitoring report that came before the executive in December shows the planning income of 419.20 is estimated to be £100,000 above that forecast over a year ago, and yet the figure stated in the budget is that estimated a year ago. and does not take into account the additional fees the council has received. I'm going to say that this is not the first time this has happened. In fact, we're in a similar position a year ago. A year ago, there was the planning fees were understated. So in fact, there's 2 years running, the planning fees for the forthcoming year have been understated. That being the case, what is proposed, that as a result of that happening 2 years running, it is proposed that the anticipated income from planning fees be increased by £75,000. In other words, within the budget, there is fed an additional £75,000 being a contribution towards the expenditure items that we've just dealt with. Now, I don't know whether an officer would like to... Mr. Weimer, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Chair. I think a little bit of background on how we try to predict planning fee income. It's never going to be an exact science because you never know for sure when an application is going to be submitted. And prior to the adoption of the joint local plan, when we didn't have as members will recall, we didn't have an up-to-date development plan, we didn't have a 5-year supply, and we were receiving a significant number of speculative applications across probably a 2 or 3 year period. Now we have got an adopted development plan. The number of speculative applications that are coming in on sites that either don't already have planning permission or aren't allocated has significantly dried up. And I believe that we can more accurately predict the level of planning fee, because the non-major applications, that level of fee is pretty stable and has been stable for the last three or 4 years, around between sort of 460 and 490,000. But the level of major income historically has always been difficult to predict. So, for example, in 2017-18, we had 52 major applications, which is a fee income of 333,000. The following year, same number of applications, 52, but the fee income of 517,000. So it's not about the number you get in; it's about how big those sites are. Through the joint local plan monitoring exercise, we've gone through all of the allocated sites and have got indications from developers when those applications are likely to come in. And we've then worked out if they come in for the numbers of the allocations, what that planning fee would be, and have come to the conclusion that the likely to come in for major applications is 359,000. It's a reasonable assumption to make that for non-majors it will be 475, which is where we got to the 834 figure. I'm struggling to see where we're going to get an extra 75,000, because that would need another 3 sites of 65 dwellings on each site, and I just don't know where those applications are going to come from, and I don't anticipate the sites coming forward that we're not that are allocated. There's a few that probably won't come forward, so we're not counting those. But I'm really struggling to see where that additional fee is going to come from.
So would you have said the same a year ago and a year before that?
The fundamental change between a year ago and a year before that was when we're doing the budget projections, was before the joint local plan had been adopted, and we were still getting a significant number of speculative applications, which by their nature are really difficult to predict when they're going to come in, because it's not following a plan, whereas development now is following an adopted plan. So I think we've got more certainty about where the applications are going to come in, because with the adopted plan, the chances of a speculative housing application being approved contrary to policy, I would say are well, they're certainly a lot less hopeful than they would have been without the plan.
Thank you. Mr. Molyneux.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go back to the question that Councillor Sweet asked about housing benefit, because just so basically members are in a difficult decision when it comes to income. So they see increased income from the previous year, and then the temptation is to immediately increase that. And that's what happened with housing benefit. So we as officers put a huge amount of effort into recovery of housing benefit overpayments, and as a result of that, the target was increased. And then, of course, what's happened is you've built that target into your base budget, and then what happens is, as we've now finding, that we're having to reduce that target, which is where your question came, and I think that sort of echoes what could happen with planning. We've had good growth in income because we've not had a 5-year land supply in a JLP, and members are looking at that as an opportunity to increase the income targets. But if you do make that recommendation, what you might find in future years is Lisa is then putting another line in that says there's a reduction and a reduction, which puts the pressure on future years' budgets. And I just wanted to make that point to members. You know, increase in income targets is a fine balance between what's actually achievable and what's realistic. And sometimes there are factors outside of our controls that can control that. So I just wanted to make that point.
Did you want to ask?
Yeah, if I could. Thank you, Chairman. With regard to the planning income, I'd just like to ask both, I guess, both Mr. Weimer and Mrs. Hosking. I mean, members of this council who were here particularly during the last 4 years will have sat through a period when the planning department in this council has been under severe pressure, both financial and manpower. And if we're going to take the sort of decision that's proposed here, I would like assurances that our planning department is now properly resourced, properly staffed, and has adequate capacity to deal with anything that may come across it in the future. I do not want to go through another 4 years like we had in the past. So I would like to know that planning department is adequately resourced.
Mr. Wyman, do you want to answer that question? Sorry.
I'll take this one, thank you. Yes, our planning department is as well resourced as it has ever been in my time at the council. With respect, though, that's not the question that concerns officers in this debate at the moment. Our concern is that we have done a very detailed forensic look at all the applications that are likely to come forward over the next year. And as Mr. Weimer said, it's not an exact science, but we've got incredibly detailed data, and we have checked with the developers of those sites, and we know the numbers that have been allocated against them, and we're somewhere in the region of around 200 plus short in terms of houses. So unless you can conjure up sites where we might place those houses, find those developers who will bring them forward, get those planning applications in and the fees in, we don't see any way that we can make an additional 75,000 revenue target on the evidence and the data that we have available to us.
Thank you. Councillor Austin.
So the problem with the recommendation is fundamentally that the income from planning fee is understated is fundamentally wrong. It isn't understated, it's an accurate representation of what we believe we're going to get. As a council, we've asked the officers to go away and come up with a budget. They've come up with an accurate budget in terms of planning income. They've told us what that is, and we are now telling them that they are wrong as an overview and scrutiny committee, when we frankly don't have any evidence at all to contradict what they're telling us. Now, as I mentioned the last time I spoke, I believe the real reason we're coming up with this is because we're trying to justify the fact that we've just voted not to put up car parking by 4%. So the original proposal was to put up car parking by 4%, off charge below inflation. It's clear that for political reasons we didn't want to do that. So we've justified this by saying, and the income from planning fees is understated, when clearly it isn't. So fundamentally, if we approve the recommendation that's here, and then we also go along with freezing car parking charges as well, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee are effectively putting forward a budget that just fundamentally isn't going to work to the council. I don't believe that we're going to be doing any favours to the council as a committee to put forward recommendations which are clearly not been scrutinised correctly and are just a fiction, effectively.
Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we should look a little bit more broadly at where our income comes into for planning. Obviously, Mr. Weimer quite reasonably has kind of talked about the major sites. But in fact, now that we've got, I mean, as much as I disagree with it, we've got a settlement on Brexit, I think more people are feeling more confident about spending money. And a lot of our income from planning fees comes in from individuals doing one or two type of developments. I mean, we're talking, you know, 370 or something for just a pre-application advice. There's all sorts of monies that come in, quite substantial monies, that I don't think are being taken into account from this. And I know it's a bit random, but I do think we're going to see an increase in applications from individuals as much as we are the largest sites. And I'm not sure from what Mr. Weimer said as to whether that was also being taken into account or being given the benefit of an increase based on that perhaps, you know, our finances in this country have slightly stabilised a bit more and people are a bit more confident about spending. And certainly if people want to invest, often they will invest in their own home.
Thank you. Councillor Brazil.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I accept that we're not, that these are the figures that we proposed here are provisional, and I respect the fact that the officers have been prudent in their estimations of the income. However, the last 2 years we've gone well over the amounts that they've expected. So, you know, I respectfully. We're not saying they've got it wrong, we're just saying that we think there's a bit of extra money here and we can use that by freezing car parking charges. Can I just also say that if we're to believe the government, austerity is over. This council will be getting plenty more money. We've got the Brexit bounce coming up. So I'm slightly disappointed that my colleagues over there seem to be so depressed about the fact that we won't have loads of money sloshing around. You can't have it both ways. You can't sell us that austerity's over and that leaving the European Union is going to be wonderful for us, and then at the same time tell us that we haven't got any money to spend and you've got to increase taxes, increase charges and cut services. You know, that is the truth of the matter. We don't believe it over here. We think that that's not the case, but you do. You do. That's the party that you support, and therefore you should be supporting these cuts in charges and this increase in spending for local council because that's what you expected and that's what you voted for.
Thank you, Councillor Brazil. Councillor Foss.
Well, it's Councillor Pringle first.
So, sorry, Councillor Pringle.
Putting aside Councillor Brazil's sarcasm, which, you know, we're used to by now, and, you know, if he wants to throw stones, Lib Dems did leave a lot of debt some time ago. Anyway, I don't see how we can put forward random figures for planning when there's, you know, we can't afford to pay for the freeze in the car park.
Who's next? Councillor Foss.
It's strange, isn't it? The opposition are saying that we're saying that there's going to be a big bounce. We're not assuming anything. We're just working on figures that are in front of us. And when officers tell me they've worked these figures out, they've already been told the reason they were wrong over the previous, and that was because of the joint local plan. That is now in place, and I hope that we don't get quite so many applications, because as Councillor Smurden said, we had 4 years of hell, to be honest, on the planning committee. It was really hard work, but we've got to believe something. You can't go spending money you don't know you're going to get. You don't know you're going to get this. You think you might. Perhaps you will, perhaps you won't. But at the moment, we've got to work on facts. And the facts have been put to us by officers, and they're good enough for me. Thank you.
Can I just give members some comfort in that, in fact, as I mentioned earlier, the figures were incorrect for the 2 previous years. But if for some reason if it's found that the figures that are in the proposed budget are correct and that there is a 75,000 shortfall, and I very much doubt that will be the case. The fallback position for the council is this, is that in the budget there is a reserve of 1.9 million. This is unearmarked reserves of 1.9 million. The amount as a council we are required to reserve under, I believe, statutory guidelines is 1.5 million. In other words, there is £400,000 for this council to fall back on in the unlikely event that this figure of the 75,000 is not met. So in fact, it's not all financial doom and gloom. There is a fallback position. So I'd like to give that as that provides comfort to members when they come to vote on this. Councillor Pearce.
Chairman, could I just point out to those members who may not have seen it yet that Mr. Weimer sent out an email to you before this meeting started with full justification for the figures that he has put in the budget?
I've not seen that. Yeah, well, if it, yeah, okay. Councillor Spence.
A couple of things. Listening to Mr. Weimer's comments and having the greatest respect for the expertise of him and his department, I feel confident in relying on his figures. And to my mind, as a councillor, if he's saying they've got no scope to achieve additional fees, who am I to disagree? I don't have that degree of expertise, but I know that he does. And secondly, on the unallocated monies, the £1.9 million, I don't actually see anything wrong with being ahead of the game and having more in the pot than technically we should have. So why be average? Why not be better than average? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, shall we go to the vote? So, Mrs. Buckle.
Chairman, could I just add some additional information around our level of unearmarked reserves, which, as you correctly said, is just over 1.9 million. The 1.5 million is the lowest amount that we should ever look to go to for unforeseen circumstances. And actually, if you ask the view of our auditors about where our level of reserves is, our unearmarked reserves, they would say that for a council of our size, our level of unearmarked reserves would be low. When you compare us against all district councils up and down the country, they've always said our level reserves, our unearmarked reserves, are low. So I wouldn't want members to think that our reserves levels are high at the moment, that they're certainly not. And also, in setting a balance, you have to take into account prudence. And is it prudent to set a balance? You've got to set a balanced budget. That's a statutory requirement. And looking at your income targets, you've got to make sure that those income targets are realistic and they're achievable. And that's what I would ask members to look at in setting that budget. And not looking forward and thinking, well, if we don't make that income target, we've got reserves to fall back on. That should be a very last resort, because those reserves are of a low level.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. Mrs. Buckle has actually said, excuse me, quite a bit of what I was going to say. We're a prudently run council. We have been for the last 20 years, 21 years in fact, and I do remember previously to that in 1995 to 1999, as Councillor Pennington will well remember, and he can probably tell me how much the council tax was increased over the time when the council was run by a non-aligned group, mainly made up of Lib Dems, and the Conservative-controlled council has always run a prudent council and a balanced budget, which is most important. And I think we still want to carry on doing that. This is a chicken and egg situation. You've sat a group of eggs and you're not sure how many chicken you'll get out. You think you might get 13, but you only might get 6. I've been there and done it, and I do know that. So I think it's all misinformation. We've got officers which we should trust. They've given us the information before us, and you're just plucking figures out of thin air. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody? Right, can we move to the vote? All those in favour of the recommendation at the little one on the screen?
Twelve in favour, thank you, Chair.
All those against?
11 against, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, if we could move on to number 2, which is in respect of the car parking charges. It's the same principle. I won't repeat what I've said in respect of number 1. Don't know, is there an officer or an executive member wish to comment? No? Okay. Anybody want to say anything? Or shall we move to the vote? Same principle. Right, all those in favour?
That's 12 in favour, thank you, Chair.
All those against?
With 11 against, thank you, Chair.
Okay. What's next? Okay, so for what is proposed at item 3 is for the year 2020-21, the council will receive just under 1.2 million by way of the new homes bonus, of which £1 million has been currently allocated to the revenue budget, leaving a sum of £699,159 to be allocated. It is proposed that the sum of £406,543 be used as a contribution towards items 1 to 3. And that what it doesn't state here is that the balance of unallocated will be used towards, earmarked as a reserve towards a reduction in the funding gap for 2021/22. Do you want to say a few words? No? Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Chairman. I really welcome this. I think this is something, the new homes bonus is something I've considered in this council since I joined it in 2011. And I think this is actually a prudent way of considering how it can be used to work with different ways of delivering some of the services in the ways that we've already approved anyway. So I support this. And I also support the point that's being made around how it could also help us raise some funding to continue to support the community voluntary services.
I haven't come on to that yet. Okay. Right. Any other speakers? No? Can we move to the vote then in respect of item 3? All those in favour?
That's 12 in favour, thank you, Chair.
All those against?
With 10 against, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so if we can now move on to the partnership funding. Within the report, it details. Sorry. Oh yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Councillor Smurden.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, as a trustee of this organisation, I won't take part in this debate. I would just say that the organisation has already had its funding reduced by 75% from 40,000 to 10,000. Members need to ask themselves, do we really need to go this far when it would appear that it will not strain the budget? But I will leave that up to members to decide.
Thank you. So we're dealing with the matter of the partnership funding and in particular the £10,000 being sought by the CVS. Can I just say there is already £7,000 in the budget that was sent out with the papers to cover this expenditure, and therefore it is proposed that the balance of £3,000 be taken from the remainder of the unallocated new homes bonus. So the proposal is to reinstate the funding of £10,000 to the CVS. Now I know that members have had. Yes. I haven't finished yet. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. We're moving that recommendation. Well, actually, it's part of the overall proposal. It already has been proposed. It already has been seconded. It forms part of the the package, if I can call it that. So any speakers? Councillor Foss.
Yeah, I'll stand for this, Chairman, if you don't mind.
You need the speaker.
Yeah. As we all know, we've had an awful lot of emails, all councillors, and I quite understand why. We originally decided in the main budget not to give the CVS any money at all, partially because of lack of information. Since then, we've got an awful lot of information, which is great, and that's the way it should be. And I would support it giving the 10,000, but there's a few provisos on that. I'm not happy with the very fact that I don't believe they get any money from Live West or the leisure centres. They do quite a lot of work with them. It would be nice to see what income they get to support them doing that work. So what I'm saying is that this will be a service agreement for 3 years, 10 grand per year. The service agreement would involve that they provide the service, give us the information on the services they provide, how funding is actually spent, the local need, how it aligns with the corporate strategy, and is it part of the or does it achieve part of our statutory duty? If that's the case, fine. I would support it going up to the 10,000 rather than the 7. I know we're probably Mrs. Buckle will tell you. Mrs. Very good name, isn't it? Yeah, brilliant. Mrs. Buckle will say there's only 7,000, but I suspect we can find the other 3. It's not I knew the CVS did quite a lot of good work, and I think a lot of other people, but they haven't been coming forward with the information we wanted. So the executive made the decision, that the recommendation in the main budget that we cut it. A lot of us are not happy with that. Now, knowing a fair bit more of the work that they do, I'm quite happy to. I don't quite know where we're going to find the other 3 grand, but I suspect that we can do that.
It's on the paper.
Yeah,
it's on the paper. Councillor Foss, can I, as this is a recommendation to the executive, and it was the executive who determined the original budget that's between us. If we if we recommend that the £10,000 be paid to the CVS, then I would suggest that it is up to the executive if they wish to add terms and conditions to that. That's something that they can consider at the executive meeting and put to full council, rather than go into too much detail at this meeting today. Would you be happy with that?
Yeah, that's fine. But it's just I was just trying to put the principle that a lot of people thought that we didn't value the CVS. It's not the case at all. It's a very fact that there's the lack of information. As long as they can provide us with the information that are ongoing, you will get support.
Yeah, it may well be that as a result of the vote, that the executive will see that there is. Well, I'm not going to determine the outcome. It may well be that the executive understand the strength of feeling, and that they may wish to add terms and conditions to it that then goes to full council. I think that's probably the easiest way forward.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's a matter of you have ideas, the rest of all have different ideas. At the end of the day, what we need to do is all come to a consensus on what is best for this council to do for our residents, and that's what this is all about.
Okay. Councillor Ross, did you want to speak? Councillor Hawkins, sorry.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the executive member, that I share this position with Councillor May. Absolutely delighted that we are all unanimous, I think, in support of giving the donation grant to the CVS. We have had in the past 3-4 months considerable amount of officer time spent trying to get information from the CVS. And I've already agreed to set a meeting up for next week to meet the CVS and trustees, because all the grants from this have to have a service level agreement. That is how we agreed this some time ago, and I look forward to that meeting next Thursday.
Thank you. Right, any other member? Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, having been on the working group that gave the
There's a microphone. You'll need the microphone. Yeah.
Having made the recommendation, having been on the working group that made the recommendation to cut this funding, it's never been a case of we don't value the work that the CVS do. The frustration for the past 5 years of trying to get to the bottom of it is the lack of information, even when we ask for it. And I'm welcome Councillor Hawkins having the meeting with the CVS. I'm going to go along with him because to nail down what we actually still want information-wise and what I hope that we can get from them to make an informed decision at the executive to support this or not. But without the information that we have tried several times to get, I still remain with the fact that we can't support it without that information. And once we get that information, I really hope to have my mind changed and supported at executive. But I just wanted to make it very clear, the working group was never against the work the CVS does. We realise that it's invaluable to the South Hams.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe. Did you want to speak? You didn't. Councillor Hodson. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point really of how important a group that is like the interface between us and the voluntary sector is. And I think what I would caution against is expecting endless amounts of marketing, which is effectively what you end up with if you keep saying we want proof for this and proof for that, which, looking at it in our terms, sometimes it's actually very difficult to articulate A, what you do, and B, the success of what you do through the voluntary services. I mean, if you start to talk to people on the street and say, do you know about the work that CVS does? What has it done for you? You'd be surprised how many people come back and say, it's incredible, thank goodness they're there. It's the same as the Citizens Advice Bureau. A lot of ordinary people who find themselves in difficult situations need these services. But over and above that, the CVS actually draws together an awful lot of quite professional workers as well that make those links. And so some of the activities that they've done, which I personally have experienced in the past through my work with transition at different times, is that they actually draw together really interesting partnerships. And don't forget that where does this come from? This actually comes from the 1992 Rio thing of Local Agenda 21. That's why we have a CVS. That's where it's very much the small remnant of some incredible work that was where local authorities were working with the communities. So we've shrunk it in terms of our contribution. When I first joined this council, it was 25,000 they were getting a year, and that was being argued about, and it's now down to 10, and now for some reason councillors think it's all right to reduce it to 0 because somehow they're not getting the information. I think you should just, if you want to know, you should just go in the door, sit there for a couple of hours, look at some of the work that's going on, look at the inquiries that come in, look at the programmes they have. And I think it's extraordinary what they do for what they get, and I would support them completely. In fact, I'd love to see this, actually trebled, because I think the more they have, the more they will do with it. We don't challenge our parish councils and town councils Totnes Town Council has been challenged by somebody in this room in the last year, but, in terms of the money that local authorities at all levels spend, we're not so challenged as somebody like this, which is a small group, which is doing an incredible job, and I absolutely support this.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
I was certainly intending to speak up on behalf of CVS, but I'm very glad to sort of feel that that's probably not necessary, that I'm really happy to see a more unified understanding of the importance of this work. What I would like to speak about very briefly is just, I think it's really important for all members, and I know we are all aware of this because I receive the same news bulletins that we all receive, which is just to see the level of which community in this country is being degraded across the board. Figures like single mothers not able to feed themselves and missing meals, I find it really shocking. And there's actually very few things that are being done to really help people in our community. So the community voluntary sector is one of those things. So I would love to see all members really doing anything we can to support anything along the lines of this, anything that's going to be providing the support when, austerity and cuts and the kind of the gaps, like, who falls through the gaps. So anyone who's there, who's helping the people who really need it, the most vulnerable members, I think are doing an invaluable service, and I'd love to see all members really appreciating that and supporting that in any way possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, that's okay.
There seems to have been some a breakdown of communication between the council and CBS, and I don't really understand the history, but I have spoken to the chief officer, Jill Davey, and it seems to be that there's some misinformation that's been being dispersed just in the emails, certainly just recently. So the first thing I want to clear up is that this income of 300,000 that's been bandied about is wrong. They're getting something in the order of 100,000, so I understand it, this year, expected by the end of March. So this £10,000 would represent a 10% reduction in their income, which is obviously potentially is going to affect their core services. They are a wonderful organisation. I mean, the amount of work that they do is incredible, and although they provide the glue that allows a lot of small organisations to serve their communities. They help them set up and they help them with governance, training, getting funding. I mean, it's endless, and without them, these organisations wouldn't thrive and exist. And they provide a huge service to our community. And for the cost of 10,000, I mean, again, in this email that went round, the value of money for money was questioned. I would question how that value has been measured, because I would suggest that the value is immeasurable. And it is a great shame that it is only £10,000 that we are now offering them. It should be a lot more, and it's a shame that it's been reduced over the years. And I assume that this reduction has taken place largely due to, as I started this, with a seeming breakdown in communication between CBS and we should be partnering with organisations like this and working with them, and not necessarily just thinking in terms of service level agreements. That is not the right approach. Clearly, this council needs to be prudent, and nobody's suggesting that there shouldn't be, but there should be a much more emphasis on the word partnership than anything else.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. For those of you who don't read executive papers and all the partnership reports that have been in the executive papers, I think our Chief Executive would like to say a few words, if that's all right with you, Chairman.
Yes, okay.
Thank you, Chair. So it's probably worth refreshing members' memories in terms of the report that went to the Executive in September last year about partnership arrangements. Now, this was a report that the recommendation was agreed to move to a commissioning model. So what we're talking about here is that we have a certain amount of taxpayers' money that traditionally we have given as grants to various organisations. The agreement to move to a commissioning model was to ensure that that money is spent to meet the objectives of the council, and so that and to ensure the council taxpayer that we're getting value for money for those funds. Now, in order to do that, we said, well, we're not going to just cut off all the grants that we're doing. A true commissioning model would be we set out exactly what we want to achieve. We then put that in a specification and go out to the market. So we would offer it to a number of different voluntary sector or business organisations to meet that specification, and then we would review all the bids that come back, and we would say, yes, we choose to spend our money through that organisation to achieve that aim. Now, we're not at that position yet, because we have to move from that grant model to that position, and in those circumstances, any organisation would be able to bid for that money. But so where we are at the moment is in making that transition to the commissioning model. We've said to the organisations that are currently receiving grant funding from us that in order to achieve that funding for next year, we need to understand some very simple things. It's not very onerous. The things that we've asked them to do is detail the services that they provide, how the council funding would be spent, how their services meet local need, how the service aligns with the council's corporate strategy, how that service meets a statutory duty, and what other funding they receive and how they spend it. And that's to ensure that we don't double fund things. Now, that is not an unreasonable set of questions to be asking. And we have a number of times, I think, pressed CVS to have a full response for this. So Mrs. Trout, who has now actually left the organisation, but was up until Christmas, was pressing to get those responses and has used the responses they received for all of the grant funding to inform the recommendations on the budget this year. Now, that's not to say that another application might not come forward from CVS that actually meets the requirement, but to date, we have not received the evidence that the officers feel able to recommend that funding for the budget next year. So that's the situation we're in, and I think it's very important to understand that. It's not that we don't value the work of the CVS, but they have been unable to demonstrate to us sufficiently that we feel able to recommend that council taxpayers' money be put to this. So I think that's...
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I have Councillor Spencer and then Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a new councillor. I don't have any experience of CVS. I know about them, but only on a sort of peripheral type approach. But it's clear to me that from what I've heard, that the information that's been requested hasn't been provided for whatever reason. And there seems to be a big difference to me about what they do, which doesn't seem to be in question, but the way they articulate that, where perhaps that's where the error occurs. And Councillor Mackay talked about £100,000 today. That's the third figure I've heard, which is perhaps a good example of the lack of information, because I've heard 200,000 and I've heard 300,000. Now, you know, it doesn't matter at this stage what that number is, but that's just a good example of lack of information. Thank you.
Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. I move the recommendation to reinstate the £10,000 at the beginning of the debate.
That's already been proposed.
Yes.
So, does that, Mike, shall we move to the vote?
Well, I wanted it with the condition, what Councillor Foss, the conditions that he was saying, which Councillor Foss gave.
So, I thought Councillor Foss had agreed that that would be dealt with by the executive rather than this meeting.
That's fine. Thank
yes?
you.
I thought that's another, yes? Okay, sorry. Councillor Brazil.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to make a few comments on the Chief Executive's words. You know, I think that all sounds perfectly reasonable, but my concerns are that we turn this into a box-ticking exercise. I mean, it's quite clear from the emails that we've had and from my own experience that the CVS provides a fantastic service to the residents and the communities of the South Hams. The fact that their box-ticking exercise doesn't show that is a moot point in my view. I think that we should take a view as a council. Do we think this organisation does good for our communities? In my view, yes, it does. And as such, we should support it. You know, I'm interested to hear all these things about value for money and spending taxpayers' money. I wonder if this council might look at some of its own departments in that respect and to see whether they think that that's the case before they start throwing stones at other organisations which I believe provide a valuable service, and obviously I won't be supporting any proposed cuts, will be supporting the continuation of the £10,000 to the CVS, and like my colleague Jackie, in some ways I'd like to see that increased. Thank you.
Councillor Thomas.
Chairman, thank you. Could I just make a point, having worked in the voluntary and the charitable sector, the proposal from Councillor Foss, which is being backed up by Councillor Rowe, is asking the executive to set caveats similar to the caveats that the chief executive has mentioned that are required from the organisation in the first place. Now, it seems to me that if there is a problem that the organisation is unable to articulate, we should be thinking about the words that Councillor Hodgson used and Councillor McKay used about partnership. If we believe, as a council, that this organisation is doing good for the people of this district, and if this organisation is failing to articulate and meet the requirements of the district council in paper form, then surely we should be sending somebody around to sit down and talk to them and go through it and say, well, then we're satisfied.
No.
Yes. So what I'm saying is that's fine, Councillor Hargreaves, but on that basis, do we need to have a proposal that says there needs to be all these caveats when they already exist and they're going to be dealt with? Could we not just simply support the proposal that we're going to put it back onto the table?
Okay. Can I just also raise the point that we as a council do actually have a representative on the CVS? I think that's important to remember that. Yes. Councillor Hopwood.
Just on that point, this is precisely the problem. We have, for the last 5 years I've been involved with this, and for the last 5 years we have asked for specific information, and the problem was that, for instance, there is a membership scheme for which, from memory, I think people who are a part of the CVS and they receive their brochures or their flyers or whatever, or emails with what's happening within the area, they pay a £10 a year subscription. The problem is no one was paying the subscription. Only a handful of people were paying the subscription. And one of the things we asked at the meeting 5 years ago, I think it was could you please now put in place a process for making sure you collect your subscriptions annually, because this will help towards your income stream. And I can't find any evidence that that has been done. In fact, the only evidence I could find was that they'd gone out to the private sector, Live West and Fusion, and offered their services for free when organisations like that would, in my mind, would have had to pay for that service. So this is the kind of thing that we are still waiting for as a council. And I welcome the meeting next week. And I hope that between the meeting next week and the executive, we can get this information. And when you say about articulate a response, the CVS are writing funding bids for organisations, so they're quite used to form filling. They have the expertise within their organisation to fill in forms because they write funding bids. So I don't think that it's a problem of articulating response. I think it's a problem of just not getting around to doing what the council's asked previously, and this is all we are still asking for, is the evidence base on which to give this grant.
Okay, thank you. Unless anybody's got a fresh contribution to make, I suggest that we move to the vote on this. So all those in favour of the wording here is in respect of partnership funding, the £10,000 be sought by the CVS be reinstated, and then it goes on about the 3,000. All those in favour?
That's 21 in favour. Thank you, Chap.
Those against?
1 against.
One
Thank you,
against.
Chap.
Okay, thank you. So that's carried. So where do we go from here? Oh yeah, we have Councillor Smurden. Is Councillor Baldry gone to get? So, as to the remainder, it is proposed that this be how much? Is that still the amount? I think it is, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. 616. All right. Okay, right. Okay, so finally, just to make this a balanced budget, the remainder of the unallocated national new homes, so it's actually 289616. There's a typo there or an arithmetical error. To propose this be earmarked as a contribution towards the reduction in the funding gap for 2021, 2022. Do we all agree? Or do you want to speak to this? Shall we all proceed to the vote on this? Yes? All those in favour?
That's 15 in favour, thank you, Chair.
All those against? Okay.
None against, thank you, Chair.
Right, so that, if we could go back to the original, the recommendation that's on the paper. Oh, no, in fact, what we're here now. Yes, sorry, we're here now. So the first thing that we need to deal with is, which we haven't dealt with previously, is the item 1, which is the proposed increase in council tax for 2020 and 21 of £5. That's an increase of 10 pence per week or £5 per year. Equates to 3.02% increase. So, do we all agree on that? Yes? All those in favour? All those against?
That's unanimous, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We don't need to deal with little 2, little 3, little 4 or 5 because that's already been so we then turn to we've determined 6, we've determined 7. All we've got to now deal with is 8. Mr. Molyneux.
I'm going to defer to Mr. Brooke, actually.
Right, Mr. Brooke.
Thank you, Chairman. So I think it's just perhaps helpful before you debate this to set out what we think this post might do, and then, of course, you can hopefully assess its worth to the council. So I suppose maybe it's easy to start with what this isn't. This isn't somebody that spends their time specifically building up numerous relationships with every business under the sun and having a lot of time doing a lot of chatting and drinking tea, which I think is often a concern with a post that's quite hard or could be quite hard to pin down. So it's paramount we have good relationships with our business community, but we do that through the assets team, through my work, through a number of other posts in the council, through the planning team. So we don't need to bolster that. So that's not what it is. This is about our ability to bring forward strategic infrastructure to boost the economy of the South Hams and the neighbouring areas. So at the moment, by working with Plymouth City Council and Devon County Council, we do have some opportunities to bring in additional funding for some of our strategic ambitions. So let's take Langage and the ability for the section for that to provide a southern area access road, which would be really crucial to building that out, bringing it forward, bringing in business rates. Now, at the moment, the obligation is to bring that forward, sit entirely with Langage Energy Partnership under a Section 106. But if we had the ability to work with them, we had the resource and the skill set to work with them to get the details of that southern area access road ready, we could make applications for infrastructure funding in the same way that we had success with working with Devon County Council to bring forward Main Street of Sherford. And we did that early. It's made a huge difference to the number of houses that are being sold and for the ability of that huge development to actually move forward and hit some of the targets, give you your new homes bonus, which you're rightly discussing how you spend today. So it's about working smart with our partners so that we have work done in advance of these opportunities which come about because it's government's new way of devolving cash is all about pots of money with a purpose. You need to have schemes ready that you can fire off with the right applications, and then you stand half a chance of bringing these things forward. So it's about funding. This post done properly will pay for itself over many, many times. And unfortunately, we run a lean council. We do a good, hopefully, job day to day, but there isn't really the spare resource to drop everything when these opportunities land on your desk to do as good a job as you'd want to do. If you've got somebody who's able to pull all that together so it's ready, work in partnership with Plymouth, with Devon, and our other neighbouring authorities, we stand a far better chance of bringing it forward. And then that then helps to drive out the economy, to drive out enterprise, to support business, to bring in business rates. It completely lines up with our strategic corporate purpose, I would argue. So that's the vision for what this role does. It should more than pay for itself. I'd be very disappointed if it didn't pay for itself multiple times. And I think it's the built environment sector, it's infrastructure, it's business rates, and hopefully it will be very supportive of the work we want to do.
Thank you. Could just make the point that the sum involved is £25,000, it's not included in the budget at the moment, and that also my understanding is that this officer will be shared with West Devon, and that West Devon have approved or are moving towards that recommendation. Would there be is there a member of the executive who'd like to speak in support of this? Councillor Pearce.
Yes, Councillor Bastone in the room.
He was.
He was, but he's okay. No, it's all right.
He's back. Right, you're on.
You're on.
You're on.
No, it's all right. But you missed the previous bit, so I'm speaking where you might have spoken. I absolutely agree with what Chris Brooks did, and I think the point is that this is a joint officer, and we know that the Scrutiny over at West Devon has not thrown this one out, so it looks like it'll go through their budget. So it's one of these ones where if we don't support it, that's going to leave them in a strange place. But I do think, on the basis that this is going to pay for itself many times over, we'd be stupid not to. It's actually something that's been lacking. Somebody sitting there getting the money in for us to be able to spend more, and so I would support it.
One second. Is there a member who is prepared to propose this, and is a member prepared to second? Propose?
I will propose it.
Do I have a Do you have a seconder? Yes. Okay. Councillor Brazil.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, it all sounds very good, but in my experience, it isn't always the case. We've had one before, and I think all that we've got is a lottery fund, or something, or a raffle, or something like that this council does, which it doesn't particularly impress me, or I think the members of the local community. I hear in the statement that it's going to more than cover its costs, and we're going to bring in lots of money. So my suggestion would be that if you want to do it, there's no need to put any money in the budget, because as we've heard from Chris Brooke and the leader, that it's going to more than wipe its face, and as such, why do we need to put money in the budget? Because it's going to bring all this extra money in. So you know, I'm quite happy for that. I've always said that if we want to be more business-like, and if we are going to employ people like this to bring in extra business for this council, yeah, let's do it. But let's do it on a commission-only basis. They bring the business in, they get paid. If they don't, they don't. Because otherwise, what we do is we end up in a situation where we've got lots of officers. The remit for this job is so vast that they could be doing. We'd have no idea what they're doing, quite frankly. They could be doing masses of things, attending meetings every single day of the week, and achieving absolutely nothing, and we wouldn't necessarily know. And that's my fear, and my experience of being in a local authority is that is exactly what happens. So, as it stands, I couldn't support this at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you. Well, on the basis that we hope it will pay for itself, we will put it in the budget for this year and then see how much money it brings in. But meanwhile, could I suggest that the council papers include a job specification?
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson. Right. Councillor Sweet.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to raise the point that has been raised about concern about whether or not this is actually going to be something we invest in and then hear no more about and don't necessarily get the returns that seem to be indicated at the moment. I would suggest, as it's been said, it should be a one-year post in the first instance, and I agree with that. But also, in terms of the conversation we've just had previously about sort of the CVS looking for 10 grand, we're being asked effectively, presumably 2/3 of this cost because of our size compared to West Devon.
50%.
Oh, it's 50/50. Okay, so it's 12.5 grand. So just
no, 25.
25.
Oh, so it's a
because
50 grand roll.
the total cost is 50,
okay,
so it's 50%.
Sorry, yeah, my misunderstanding. Okay, so quite a lot then. So we've just been asking for all sorts of dot your I's and cross your T's from the CVS. I think we should have a similar kind of report back from this economy officer, ideally within 6 months, actually, as to where the role is going and what it expects to achieve.
Okay. Councillor Baldry.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll put my hand up. I was going to say very similar to what the leader said. If you look at the page, in the paper, paragraph 2.37, with all the, on page 20, all the bullet points there, it's a nonsense. We must see a job description. For one individual, most of those items on that list are a full-time job in their own right. I want to see a proper job description. I want to know when this individual, he or she, comes into the office at 9 o'clock in the morning, what they're actually going to do that day. It's looking at this list, it's a wish list. They could spend all day, every day, just sitting in meetings, achieving absolutely nothing. I can't support it as it stands and as the proposal is. I need to see a proper job description, as the leader has said.
Thank you. Councillor Sweet.
Hi, thank you. As a small business owner in the district, I'm not sure if I should be declaring an interest on this.
No, you don't.
Okay, I just, would like to see a job description as well. I don't think in the remit I saw anything about the two things which I think as a business owner will have a huge effect this year, and those are Brexit and climate change. So I believe this role could actually be really vital to be helping businesses, large and small, with those variables which we can't really quantify at the present moment. I mean, going back to the high streets again, that Brexit is the number one thing that small businesses are worried about this year, because they just don't really know the effects. So I'd really like to see that in the job description. I'd also, could you clarify how much the climate change officer is being allocated? Is it also 50,000?
Same amount. Yeah. Could I ask Mrs. Buckle just to explain where the money will come from if we as members decide to proceed? Mrs. Buckle.
Thank you, Chair. So in 2.37, the proposal would be that this would be funded from our business rates pooling gains. So we are in a business rate pool with all of the other district councils in Devon, Plymouth, Torbay and Devon County Council. We've made very good pooling gains as a partnership since 2014. Whenever we put bids to government, for example, the reason we were very successful in getting pilot status in the previous financial year was because we were able to demonstrate how we could work together with the other councils to deliver economic regeneration within our areas. And certainly around this post, it would be about, in particular, using Grant Finder. The larger councils, this is a specific piece of software. They have officers just looking at Grant Finder. As soon as the government put grant bids out, that's where it goes. It goes onto this piece of software. And this post would be looking at that and keeping an eye on that, seeing when those opportunities come up, and then putting applications in and writing the applications for that. So it is something that the larger councils are very good at doing, and this would be specifically a resource to do that, shared with West Devon. But at the moment, we've got pooling gains of 200,000 in the budget. So if this were to be approved, then that would increase to 225,000. So we are saying that the money to fund this post, because it's all to do with economic regeneration and economic delivery, would come from those business rate pooling gains. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, okay. Councillor Rowe, it's been, the two members of the executive have suggested that this be subject to the production of a full job specification. Would you be prepared to add that to your proposal?
Yes, Chairman, I would. No problem.
Okay, and the seconder? Yeah, seconder? Yes, sir.
Thank you. We're talking about job description here, and I think, going back to what Councillor Hodgson said, that actually more relevant is the outcomes and the targets, which links back to the discussion again with the CVS, because actually the job description, you can create a job description, it's whether the actual applicant, the person doing the job, actually delivers it. So I think what's more relevant for members is the outcomes and the targets, and saying that's what we want that role to do, rather than the job description itself, would be my advice.
So what are you proposing as rather than a job description?
So I think it should be clear to members what the outcomes are expected from that role and what targets we're going to set around that role delivering, rather than a job description, would be my advice. But it's members' call.
Councillor Rowe.
I understand what Mr Molyneux is saying, that we need to see results. The person coming back to us and saying what they've actually achieved. But I feel this role is like working with the LEP, various grant providers, with small businesses, business setups. We used to have very good business department several years ago, headed by a lady who was very capable of finding grants and all around the district for small businesses, and particularly with diversification in agriculture, horticulture, tourism, to name but a few businesses, which very often people think, you know, they start up, but they don't know where to go to look for grants, government grants, and there is a lot of grants out there available, and this would be a person who could, they would need that expertise to be able to point people in the right direction. I think that's one of the things they could be doing, not just wandering around town centres, diving in and out of shops and having a cup of tea or whatever. We're not going to pay them to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Chairman. Just briefly, I just wanted to say in response to what Mr Molyneux said, I do think I think it's not unreasonable for members to want to see a job description. It doesn't have to be the full spec. It doesn't, but we're going to have to generate one anyway to go in the paper. So have something just as an outline paragraph, but then, as you say, outcomes to be expected as well.
Can I just make it clear? This is a recommendation that goes to the executive. It could go to the executive, and if they want to put any further flesh on the bones, then so be it. And then that goes to full council. So I don't think we want to get too bogged down in detail, bearing in mind it's got to go to the executive and then to full council. Is there any?
No? Right, okay.
Okay, right, so the proposal is, what is the proposal? The inclusion of an economy officer post shared with West Devon Borough Council within the staffing establishment as set out at section 1.7, subject to the production of a full job specification. All those in favour?
That's 20 in favour. Thank you, Chair.
All those against? 1, 2.
2 against. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's carried. I think that deals with the revenue budget. Yes? Okay. So we now move on to the capital budget, which is item 7. No, hopefully this shouldn't take very long, so then you can have a much longer break. So the idea is to get this out of the way, and then you can have a much longer break. So, do you want to say a few words on the capital budget?
Thank you, Chair. Just to
Thank you. By the way, it's in the Carey room, not here.